right, well, welcome to our first workshop of the day. If you are looking for preventing gun violence in North Carolina, you're in the right place. I'm delighted to be here and to introduce to you our speaker today, Sara Smith with North Carolinians Against Gun Violence. She's the organizing director, has a background in public health and organizing, and brings 20 years of experience with nonprofits and universities to NCGV. Sara also co-chairs the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force for the Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina. So Sara, thank you for being with us. We look forward to learning from you today.
Thank you, Sean. Well, thanks to all of you for being here today and for your interest in this topic. And thank you to the North Carolina Council of Churches for inviting me to speak today. Most of my presentation will cover the work of North Carolinians Against Gun Violence, but since I'm speaking to people of faith, I'm also going to talk about the work that I'm a part of with the Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina. North Carolinians Against Gun Violence's mission is to make North Carolina safer from gun violence through the education of the public about preventing gun violence, the enforcement of current gun laws, and the enactment of needed new laws. So I think it's important to start out with a description of the problem, because when we hear about individual cases on the news or experience them in our own life, it's hard to get a scope of what's happening here outside of our own area, outside of our own media markets, and around the state. And yet, when we talk about big numbers, we can't lose the sense of tragedy about each one. Each one represents a life cut short, and a family and community forever changed. And each one was preventable. 2021 was the most violent year of the 21st century in North Carolina and in the United States. In 2021 in North Carolina, there were 1,839 people who died by firearms. 916 were firearm suicides. Firearm suicides are the most common type of gun death year after year. 850 died by firearm homicide. 46 were unintentional or accidental, not on purpose shootings. 15 were legal intervention, which is the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's category for when police are shooting someone while they're working, or operations of war. 12 were undetermined, meaning the cause was unclear. We also need to talk about what's happening among our kids and teens, particularly since the pandemic. Almost twice as many North Carolina kids were killed by guns in 2020 compared to the year before, and more than twice as many died by guns in North Carolina in 2020 compared to the year before. There's truly a crisis among our kids. Nationally, gun deaths are now the leading cause of death among children. More than disease, more than car accidents, guns. So this is a map showing firearm injury put together by the State Health Department based on emergency department visit rates in North Carolina. So the rates are measured in the number of people who have been injured in these emergency department visits per 100,000. And the reason we talk about rates is to help us compare what's happening in different parts of the state or in different counties, regardless of population size. So if you look at this map, it might not be what you would expect to see with regard to, in this case, gun injury, but gun mortality shows a similar trend. The places experiencing the most violence by rates are northeastern North Carolina, and then down here among Robeson County. So we have to remember, the reason I show this map is that I feel like we have to remember that rural North Carolina is also deeply suffering from a crisis of gun violence and is in need of solutions just as much as our cities. So next I want to start focusing on solutions and advocacy. Community violence intervention programs are one solution to firearm violence. These programs are addressing the root causes of violence, such as lack of affordable housing, employment, education, trauma therapy, and substance abuse counseling. They work with people at risk of violence, either at risk of having it perpetrated against them or victimizing someone else before the violence occurs. So they change community norms so that the first thing that people do when there's a conflict is not reach for their firearm. They work with them in the midst of a crisis. They get called in to provide mediation to prevent it from escalating. And they work with people after a shooting has occurred to prevent retaliation, because retaliation is a big factor and a big cause of gun violence. So in street outreach programs, like Cure Violence, which is one model that we have in North Carolina, outreach violence interrupters are mediating and preventing retaliatory violence to those who may be at risk to become victims of violence or to perpetrate violence themselves. They include long-term support to people and communities impacted by gun violence, as well as the immediate crisis response. Hospital-based.
Excuse me, Sarah.
Sure.
May I ask, is this presentation going to be available to us through NCC?
I believe so. It's being recorded, so they'll share that with attendees. I'm not sure exactly how, but yeah. So hospital-based violence intervention programs are another type of community violence intervention program that we have in North Carolina. So these types of programs are founded on the idea that there's a window of opportunity to work with someone in the aftermath of a shooting, to participate with victims and their families, and also to prevent retaliation. Hospital-based programs have culturally competent case managers. They're often people from the same community that work with individuals in the hospital, and then afterwards connecting them with social services, addressing, again, the root causes of violence, and in some cases even relocating people because it's not safe for people to go back to the same area. So this is really important because within the first 5 years of a hospitalization for a firearm injury, the chances of recurrence are as high as 45%. So this is really important kind of program. So these are maps of where our current programs are in North Carolina. The programs have been expanding over the last few years, which is exciting to see because these programs do work in the areas where they're implemented. Street outreach programs in particular focus on a really small targeted area and work with the people at highest risk of committing the violence. So in the areas where they're working, they do work really well. So what we need is expansion into other areas of the same cities that are having violence, as well as, if you look at this map, this is not the same as that map where we saw the high injury rates, right? So we need to also be considering smaller areas that are also suffering from violence. So the programs that we have, again, very exciting to see them expand over the past few years. There's the oldest program is in Durham. There's another great program in Greensboro and one in Winston-Salem, Charlotte, and Wilmington. And the newest is right here in Raleigh. And that's being implemented right now. So those are the street outreach programs. The hospital-based programs there are fewer of them, but we're excited to see them expand as well. Durham, Winston-Salem, Charlotte, and Wilmington. So most of these programs are currently funded by city or county funds. A few programs are funded by American Rescue Plan funds, which are not permanent, right? We urgently need for community violence intervention programs to be included in the state budget, which is being in the process of being negotiated right now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about funding of CVI programs, because in order for these programs to be successful, they have to be funded, right? People have to be paid to do this work. And they need to be funded consistently year after year, not funded for 2 years, fall apart because they don't have enough funding, then start up the next year. These programs rely on relationships, particularly the street outreach, the relationships that are between the outreach workers and the violence interrupters and their community, and they need consistent funding in order to be successful. So this is one example of funding. In June of last year, Raleigh committed $1.2 million of its American Rescue Plan funding to CVI. The street outreach program that is being launched right now is called Boots on the Ground. WakeMed is also developing a hospital-based program. So just a little bit about the benefits. Even modest investments in community violence intervention yield a 30% reduction in gun violence, and the potential to save the cost as well to society and to taxpayers. So these programs are effective not only at saving lives, they also save costs to the healthcare system, criminal justice system, and to society. So another way that these programs are funded is through the North Carolina Governor's Crime Commission. The Crime Commission serves as the chief advisory body to the governor and the Secretary of Public Safety on crime and justice issues. Members include heads of statewide criminal justice agencies, appointed state and local government officials, and private citizens. So the Governor's Crime Commission distributes Department of Justice funds throughout North Carolina. So it's another funding mechanism. In June of 2021, we organized a presentation for the GCC about the importance of community violence intervention programs. And then in 2021 and 2022, we're really grateful to the governor for having as one of his 4 priorities funding for CVI programs. So two Governor's Crime Commission committees listed community violence intervention strategies in their request for proposals. And these are the 2 committees. So this was the first time that the Crime Commission has prioritized funding for CVI programs. So that was very exciting as well. And that's the way that we're able to see more programs being expanded, is more funding being allocated to these kinds of programs. Another funding source is the state budget. So 2021, they funded 2 programs for 2 years. This was the first time that our state government has allocated money for community or hospital-based violence intervention programs. So in June of last year, it was very exciting for Congress to finally do something on guns after around 30 years. Senator Tillis was one of the lead negotiators on the plan, and we met with his staff to advocate for specific pieces of the bill, and we also met with Senator Burr's staff. We worked with our volunteers and supporters to help make this happen, and we really hope that you'll join us in this work. So these are the pieces of what happened with the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act: an enhanced background checks review process for 18 to 21-year-olds who are looking to purchase guns, investment in child and family mental health, incentives for states to adopt extreme risk protection order laws. So we don't have an extreme risk protection order law in North Carolina. We really need one. These laws take weapons away from someone who has made a credible threat to commit violence against themselves or against someone else. And they're very effective programs in other states. It's been shown that for every 10 to 20 risk protection orders that are issued, 1 suicide is prevented. So they're really powerful programs, and we wish that we had them here in North Carolina. Bills have been filed year after year, but they don't get a hearing in our General Assembly, let alone a vote. Penalties for when a person who can legally buy a gun turns around and sells it to someone who can't legally buy a gun, so that's called straw purchases. Closing the dating partner loophole in domestic violence protection orders. And $25 million over 5 years for community violence intervention programs, which is a big number and very exciting. And also, when spread out over an entire country over 5 years, you can see this can't be the only funding mechanism, right? So this is another very exciting development. We're incredibly grateful to Governor Cooper for his leadership on the first Office of Violence Prevention in the South. This will make a real difference in community violence intervention and other gun violence prevention programs across the state. So this office was created, this was launched this March. It's the first Office of Violence Prevention in the South, and and there are only 6 other Office of Violence Prevention in the country. North Carolina's office will provide training and technical assistance, issue best practice guidelines, facilitate information sharing, conduct public awareness campaigns, share data, collaborate with research institutions, because it's really important that the effectiveness of programs is measured so that the good ones can be replicated in other places. Identify and apply for funding from federal and philanthropic sources. Because as I've said, these programs can only be successful if they're consistently funded. So, and now we need to talk about what's happened in our General Assembly. In March, the General Assembly repealed our pistol purchase permitting system. The reason this was important was because federal law requires a background check on firearms purchases from federally licensed firearms retailers. So the system closed the so-called gun show loophole, but it was more than just gun shows. It was also internet private sales and private sales in communities. So it closed that loophole by requiring a background check on a handgun purchased no matter where it was purchased in the state, even when buying from private sellers or hobbyists. So by passing Senate Bill 41, the General Assembly repealed North Carolina's pistol purchase permitting system. Decades of research showed that this was one of the most effective gun violence prevention programs. We'd been able to stop this from happening in collaboration with other organizations like the Council of Churches. We really worked in coalition to try and stop this. But in 2021, the Sheriff's Association changed their position, and since then, it's been really hard to generate bipartisan support. We're very thankful for Governor Cooper vetoing this bill, but there weren't enough Democrats present to sustain the veto, and it broke down along party lines. We have a sister organization that worked very hard on this. This law was preventing homicides, was preventing mass shootings, preventing suicides from guns, and preventing trafficking. So it was a really effective law, and it's truly a tragedy that it is not in place anymore. The same bill also now allows firearms in religious places of worship with associated schools. Before this year, guns were already allowed in religious places of worship. The exception had been places of worship that shared property with the school. Lawmakers tried to repeal this exception in 2020 and in 2021, but this year it passed with Senate Bill 41. So what are our remaining priorities for this legislative session? So in North Carolina, our legislative sessions run for 2 years. So we're kind of in the middle of the first year of that biennial session. We have 2 remaining priorities for this year. One is funding for community violence intervention programs and for safe storage program awareness funding. And the second is keeping North Carolina's concealed carry weapons permitting system, the law in North Carolina. And I'm going to go into that a little bit because there was an attempt to repeal this system as well. That attempt thankfully failed very recently. So under current law, in North Carolina, in order to get a permit to carry a concealed weapon in public, you have to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. You have to be a North Carolina resident for at least 30 days. You have to be at least 21. You can't be suffering from any impairment that would inhibit safe handling of a firearm. You have to be able to pass a background check. You have to complete live firearm training, so live firing of a handgun, as well as instruction in state carrying laws. And it has to be renewed every 5 years. So this system is keeping us safer because people, in order to legally be able to carry a firearm, they have to go through this process. Permitless carry has passed just in a widespread way in other states around the country, and it's passed very quickly. And there was an attempt to do that here. just in the last few weeks. So if we think about what we lose when we lose these things, it's younger people being able to carry concealed in public, no background check required to carry concealed, no live firearms training, no knowledge required of a state's law. So as I mentioned, the legislature attempted to repeal this permitting system with North Carolina House Bill 189. So it happened very fast, and it was advocacy truly that stopped this from becoming law. It was scheduled for a committee hearing on a Thursday afternoon for the following Tuesday morning. It flew through 2 committees in 2 days, and we were very worried. It was scheduled for a House vote at the end of the second day in committee, and was pulled at the very last minute. And when I say pulled at the very last minute, it was pulled after they were already voting on other bills on the schedule. So lawmaker outreach at key moments can really make a difference in stopping really harmful bills like this from becoming law. And it did in this case. We're really grateful to our coalition for really jumping to it because all of this happened so fast. But we're very glad that this bill did not become law.
Do you want to save questions for later? I'll try to remember mine.
Sure, go ahead.
How effective is it to contact people out of district?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in general, lawmakers would rather hear from people in their own district. So what is effective is contacting people you know who live in those areas and asking them to call. Yeah, sure. So we have to also talk about safe firearms storage and why this is important. And the fact that not all safe storage options are the same. Gun safes and gun cabinets are the safest option. They're also very expensive. Lock boxes are another option. For people who are worried about being able to get to their firearm very quickly, there are options that use a fingerprint instead of a key, and multiple fingerprints can be programmed in. Cable locks are an option, especially if you have a child around, but they're best really for stopping a young child. They're good, but they're not as safe, just in all honesty, as gun safes or gun cabinets. Those are the safest option at stopping a child, a teenager, someone in the house who's depressed, or someone who breaks into the home. So why safe storage awareness funding? Well, a few reasons. One is that there have been huge buying increases in the last few years, particularly since the pandemic. And there were a lot of first-time gun owners who bought since the pandemic, and they didn't get the same kind of training that maybe people who grew up with firearms around, their parents taught them how to store them safely and why it was important. So they need education. There's also been a spike in gun thefts, especially from unlocked vehicles. A lot of firearms are being stolen because people are leaving firearms unlocked in their cars out in the open and leaving their doors unlocked in residential neighborhoods. And so it's very easy for someone who is looking to steal a firearm to just go through cars until they find one. And that's what's happening. Over 1,000 in Charlotte alone a couple of years ago. And that's one city. It's happening across the state. And that was reported. That was the number of reported thefts. More kids and teens have been getting their hands on firearms and bringing them to school. You've probably seen this in the news. And they're getting them in one of two ways. They're getting them from either their own home or the home of another family member, or they're stealing them. And both of those situations can be prevented by people storing their firearms appropriately. And the other risk is unintentional shootings, which continue to happen year after year. So if you own a firearm, please don't store your guns in your car or truck. If you do, use a lockbox, store it in the trunk if you must. But really, this is a major way that guns are being stolen and being used to harm other people in your own community. It's very important that we have this awareness about why safe storage is important. It doesn't just affect you or your household, it affects the entire community when firearms are stolen and used to kill someone else in the community. So that's all for the NCGV portion of my presentation. I really hope that you'll join NCGV in our legislative work. There's a clipboard up here for you to sign up with us, or if you go to our website, ncgv.org, you can sign up to get our legislative alerts. And so I thank you for your attention on that part of the presentation. And now switching hats a little bit, I'm part of the Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina's Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, and I wanted to share what we've been working on since we began our work together last summer. Our diocese doesn't cover the whole state. It covers from roughly Iredell County to Edgecombe County and Caswell County to Scotland County, so the central part of the state. This statement is from a pastoral letter sent out by our bishops last summer. I love this statement and have come back to it again and again, and I'm grateful to Bishop Rodman for his leadership in prioritizing action and advocacy. We have powerful voices as people of faith. So I'm just going to read the statement because I know the font is kind of small. We cannot allow the volume and frequency of these events to leave us feeling numb and powerless. It is time to step outside our comfort zone. It's time to put our thoughts and prayers into action. It's time to bear witness in the public square that our country's tolerance of inaction to this violence is itself a form of collusion with such violence. This is our call as followers of Jesus. This is what it means to become a disciple, making a difference. And you can find that statement and a list of resources of our work at this website on the Diocese of North Carolina website for the Episcopal Church. So a little bit about what we've been working on together since we began our work last year. So we're comprised of a mix of clergy and lay people from across the diocese with experience in some aspect of this work. So retired law enforcement, medical personnel, clergy advocacy. Advocacy is one part of our call that we received from Bishop Rodman last year. So how are we encouraging and engaging in advocacy? Well, one thing that we did was put together a resolution on reducing gun violence that was passed at our annual diocesan convention at the end of last year. And advocacy took up about a third of that resolution, a commitment to specific pieces of advocacy. We share advocacy resources on the website that I mentioned, or the page that I mentioned on the diocesan website. Organizations links to organizations doing this work, action links for emailing lawmakers about specific bills that are moving. Our bishops also make public statements online about why gun violence prevention work is important and on specific pieces of legislation. There are meetings with lawmakers about legislation related to gun safety and gun violence prevention. So we're looking to bring more clergy and lay people into the diocese, into this advocacy, as we are continuing to grow in our work together. So we see communication and education as really important because there's a lot of misinformation out there about guns and gun violence, what the causes and solutions are. So we see equipping clergy and lay people in our diocese as really important and a foundation for action. Communication is key, so I feel really fortunate that our group can work with amazing and supportive communication staff at the diocese. So a few of the ways that they get the word out to equip clergy and lay people at our 111 parishes are the creation of the diocesan website with educational content and advocacy links. They highlight the problem of gun violence and solutions like community violence intervention programs in the quarterly diocesan magazine, which goes out to households and parishes around the diocese. And communicate with clergy about learning opportunities for learning and engagement. And we hope to expand that into communicating with lay people and parishes around the diocese as we continue to do this work.
Sure. I know the North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church also has a gun violence group, and I didn't know if you were doing any out, and I'm sure other congregations do, I didn't know if you were doing any outreach to other denominations.
Not yet. That's something we could definitely look to in the future. We just began our work together in June of last year, so we're kind of just getting started, but it's great to know. So thank you for sharing that. It's definitely something I can take back to the group as we move forward. Thank you. Yeah.
Are we at the Q&A section?
Sure. I just want to say thank you to everyone for your attention, and I'll do my best to answer questions.
I have two questions.
Okay.
The first one is advice on the fascination with guns that is there among children. Like, how do we teach our children that even playing with Nerf guns is replicating behavior that I, as a mother, don't like. So advice on how we educate children about the reality of gun violence in a way that's appropriate. And then secondly, what's a church to do that has a school affiliated with it now? I mean, what's a church to do, period, but what's a church with a school especially to do?
Yeah, so to the question about a church with a school affiliated with it, it's possible to ban weapons on campuses, on the church property, to put up signage. And one thing that our church does is, post in the bulletin that firearms are not welcome at our church. So it's very clear. Yeah, so that's one option. To the question about the fascination among kids, I mean, I think just talking to them as a parent about, these can hurt people, and starting at an early age, that's a cultural issue, and I'm not sure I'm totally equipped to answer it. But it's hard to fight for sure. It's in video games, it's in television, it's, a reminder that this is not just something on the screen like this. In real life, use of these weapons can hurt people, and starting that, I think, at a young age.
You talked about a sister organization, and I was wondering what that sister organization was, and also what's the difference between what you do and I think it's called Moms Against Gun Violence? If you could talk about the differences.
Sure. So the sister organization is NCGV Action Fund. So that's our C4. So I'm here speaking about the C3 today, but yeah, you're welcome to check out the C4 and follow our social media. It's pretty similar to these, except it's all at NCGV Action on all of the social media, and yeah. So that does more advocacy and can get involved in electoral work as well. So we're a state organization. We've been working in the state to prevent gun violence for 30 years, and we are part of coalitions that are national of other state-based groups, but we're like fully independent ourselves. Moms Demand Action is an amazing national organization with state chapters. So, we work with them a lot, and yeah, they're a great partner. Yeah.
Since this is a legislative session, what concrete thing do you want us to do to move the legislature?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the Senate's budget just dropped yesterday, and we want to see community violence intervention programs funded. So calling your senators right now. It's the Senate version that just dropped, but the two versions, will be negotiated, and a final bill or a final budget will come at some point in the summer. So calling your senator today and asking them to include community violence intervention programs in the budget. We're advocating for $20 million. Based on the scope of the problem in North Carolina. The violence keeps increasing and increasing, and we don't want to see just one program in one city. We want to see it in a number of cities and smaller towns statewide where the problem is really killing a lot of people. It's urgent. It's truly life and death. So that is one thing you can do absolutely today, and encourage other people to do the same. Yeah. Yeah.
Two questions. One, there used to be laws, I don't know whether they're still in effect, where bars and other public places would say no
Yeah.
guns allowed. Have those gone away?
No, I mean, on private property, you're allowed to ban weapons. I don't think that's changed as far as I know.
And the other question is, how far away is North Carolina from becoming like Texas, where they have open carry and all that, where there've been numerous mass shootings this year?
Well, that's a hard question to answer, and there are a lot of amazing people in Texas doing really hard work there. I think I was really heartened to see the fact that the concealed carry weapons permitting bill was pulled. So speaking out on these really extreme bills continues to be very important. I think we have to look at what happens as a result of the pulling of the pistol purchase permit repeals, or pistol purchase permit system in North Carolina. Other states that have done away with their systems have absolutely seen an increase in homicides and suicides from guns. So we have to watch that and see, and if enough people speak out in years in the future, maybe that's something that we can get back. Yeah.
What about when the sheriffs used to issue the pistol permits? Do you see that as making it easier?
That definitely changed the amount of bipartisan support that we had, because sheriffs and lawmakers have said publicly, I listen to my sheriff. So one of the reasons that the bill, the HB 189, failed was that the Sheriff's Association said, don't do this. So their advocacy was important, because lawmakers, there are some who will say, I listen to my sheriff, I'm going to do whatever my sheriff tells me. So law enforcement has a really powerful voice, for sure. So for now, that system remains intact. But it's important to keep speaking. I'll say that again and again, because, with pressure, we can keep, from becoming other states that are, I don't want to single out Texas. It's not just Texas, right? Like, permitless carry has passed in many states around the country in the past few years. It's passed so fast that the research about it has not even been able to keep up with the damage that it's doing, because it's just flown through so many state legislatures.
Are those pieces, we've heard of ALEC. Is there a group behind pushing these permitless? Is it any particular groups that are organized?
Yeah, the NRA continues to be very powerful, and there are smaller advocacy gun rights groups, for sure, that are behind a lot of this. Yes.
Sarah, is it difficult to go back to your first two slides? I think those were the first two that had some
Sure.
statistics that I wanted to capture.
Absolutely. Let me see if I can go back without scrolling through all of them. There. Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you.
sure. Yes.
Last year, I received a letter from our nemesis, Mr. Wayne Lapeer from the NRA. Many people probably got it, and it starts out, "Dear friend, I've got 4 words at the heart of liberty for you to be concerned about. Shall not be infringed. Every hour, every day, your Second Amendment rights are coming under increasing attack by a fanatical gun-hating president, by extremists in Congress, by billionaire media moguls, and by soft-on-crime politicians." Of course, he goes on and talks about joining the NRA and saving the Second Amendment. Your rights are being threatened. Are we doing anything to counter some of that misinformation from the NRA regarding the whole idea of taking our Second Amendment rights away?
Yeah, so I think, So the answer is yes. It's a lot of groups raising their voice on social media, and in the media, in the public square, and saying, what about the right of my child or my young person to grow up safely, right? And I think people are seeing the increase in violence, and they're seeing what happens when there's no restrictions on firearms. The cost of gun violence, I don't have it on this slide, but it was in 2021, and I include that year because that's the most recent year for which we have data available, over 48,000 people died from guns. Like that, we're in a crisis. And I think the amount of gun violence that we're seeing is countering the notion that guns make us safer. Obviously, there are going to be people who never agree with that, right? But I think it's a matter of advocacy organizations and education organizations speaking out and countering the misinformation. And conversations like this are really important. And for you all to go out and talk to people when you hear these facts. I mean, my husband gets letters like that too, and I mean, it's just so easily unprovable. Conversations like this are really important. And for us to speak to our people and say, you see what's happening, right? Like, we can't keep living like this. We've tried their method. It's not working. People are dying. We have to do something different. And speaking to our lawmakers and letting them know that we're paying attention is really, really important. They're the ones who are making decisions about these. And, there's not one law or one program that's going to stop all gun violence. But when we see this trickle effect of getting rid of one thing after another, that absolutely contributes to the problem. And we need to, change course on that.
Yeah, I was watching Fareed Zakaria this past Sunday, his program GPS on CNN, and he was comparing our country to the UK and Australia and the history of how things changed in those two places, and that it in fact was a conservative government moved by mass shootings in each country that actually tipped the balance. And I just bring that up because those are two countries that a lot of Americans can identify with culturally. And I say that to say, when we look at statistics like this, it's easy to feel hopeless. But I think people in those countries may have felt that way until it wasn't hopeless. And so I just want to say that to encourage us that things can change. And they will change when enough of us are fed up with the violence and the effects of violence. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for helping us to be a part of your work.
Thank you. I do hope that you'll, whoops, I don't want to trip over cords here. I really appreciate that. And, speaking out, like I said, is so important. And I also want to mention, if you'd like to continue to be part of what we're doing, you can sign up through our website, ncgb.org, or sign this here and we'll enter you into our system so you can keep up, because there are, like I mentioned, the key moments are so important. Speaking out, not just any time, but especially when legislation is moving, or like right now when the budget is being negotiated, and saying, these are effective programs and we need to see more of them. North Carolinians are dying, they're being injured and they're being killed, and we demand this. We demand this right now. So thank you.
Yes, I'm glad the Second Amendment came up, because the actual wording, a well-regulated militia, comma, an important comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. We've got a National Guard. It's the closest thing to a well-regulated militia that has survived however long it's been in place. And the letter writers that we're talking about don't give that a nod at all. To people who are really don't want, who are anti-gun activists altogether, this sounds like a kind of a compromise. But this is what it says. This is what it says. And if you want to take a roll, you know, you might carry a copy of this with you and say, well, this is what it actually says. And talk about what a well-regulated militia looks like. January 6th was not that.
No.
And I have written that to my senators and gotten nowhere.
Well, the US Supreme Court's pretty much ended that.
Yeah, no, they did not repeal the
No.
Second Amendment.
No, but they've rewritten what it means.
Well, no, they used this identical version in Delaware versus, or Washington, D.C. versus Delaware. And that, I think that's the most recent case that they have. They've not said that that doesn't apply anymore. I don't think. Maybe they did. I missed it.
Good morning, and thank you for your presentation. My name is Gloria Thomas, Reverend Gloria L. Thomas, Dr. Gloria L. Thomas. I was sitting here and I was thinking, what is this deep-seated fear that people have that that they feel that they have to have these powerful guns that is being permeated through mostly people who have hateful hearts. And I was just reading, this is something that I copied down, these statistics. It says, these are the facts. Gun violence is the number one killer of children in the United States, which you have made mention to. There is an overproliferation of guns in the country compared to the number of law enforcement officers asked to protect us. Says, in fact, there are 433.9 million guns compared to not quite 700,000 sworn officers. Put that on your scale.
Well, right, and that's one of the reasons why law enforcement opposed the repeal of concealed carry, the concealed carry system, right? Because they know that it's dangerous for just anyone to be carrying around legally all the time. And we know, it's true that not everyone is going to follow the law, but we're a country of laws, and you absolutely need laws in place that, are created to protect people. But also, you're right about the fear. I mean, that's something that the NRA is absolutely playing to, right? Like the letter that you were talking about, they're trying to make people afraid to sell more guns, right? It's a
paper tiger. I mean, is there really that type of fear in actuality that would impress upon a person that you need a gun, what do you call those, safe, and you need all of these, what are those most powerful ones that they're using in the schools? I mean, who are you gonna shoot? Who are you afraid of? The people you live beside? What's going on? I would just love to hear someone say, this is why I have all these guns, and this is who I'm afraid of.
I think probably I have just a few minutes, but maybe one last question.
It's more a statement than a question that recently with the mass shootings and mass killings, I appreciate that the media is saying receive the firearm legally. I think that's important to hear too, that even our laws that we have are not protecting us from the violence that can come with a person taking on a weapon that perhaps they shouldn't have to begin with. And I'm both disheartened but also hopeful that if that starts circulating in circles where the NRA's writings are circulating, that maybe they'll see that this is not what God intended, this is not what our forefathers intended. But I also think that a lot of folks don't move until they've been affected. And this brings in race and money also in where the effect can happen.
Is that okay? Thank you. I'm happy to talk to folks afterwards. I thank you for your time and your attention and your questions. And feel free to, to see me afterwards.
We're here because we care, and Sarah's here because she cares. So let's give her a round of applause.